Hi everyone, my name's Lauren and I'm a member of Pendennis Good News Church, and I'm going to share with you today some of my thoughts from the past few weeks. So Boris has made an announcement again. Now that's not exactly news, is it? It's been a bit of a pastime of recent months. The government says that they're going to make an announcement, the media somehow leaks all of the information in advance, and then the government makes the exact same announcement that the lunchtime news told us they were going to make, but this time they've added some questionable graphs and tables that are supposed to explain it all in more detail. So what makes this announcement so different? Well, this time around it appears that there may well be light at the end of the tunnel. That's right, Boris has created a roadmap to get us out of lockdown and bring us all back to some form of normality, whatever normality is these days. For some people, I'm sure that this announcement comes with much relief. For others, it may seem like a false, unrealistic hope, that particularly if past announcements have been anything to go by. And for others still, it may be a cause of worry. And you're not alone. For me, this announcement brings up a mixed bag of emotions. Excitement that I may get to hang out with my friends again, be able to sit in a coffee shop, or have a meal with people I'm not in a bubble with. But it also brings about a whole load of worry. What are things going to look like when we get out? Will my body cope with the change of pace? In some ways, chronic fatigue has been a lot easier to manage when the only social obligation is to sit on your sofa on Zoom. Will things be the same as before? What's going to be different? How do I explain to my friends I can no longer do some of the things I used to be able to do as a result of my chronic illness? There is a whole lot that we could get bogged down by worrying about. In the service on Sunday, Paul talked to us about a passage in Matthew 6, verses 25 to 34, about how Jesus tells us to cast our worries onto him. Verse 34 reads, "Therefore do not be anxious about tomorrow, for tomorrow will be anxious for itself. Sufficient for the day is its own trouble." As Christians, we have a great assurance that we can come to Jesus with our worries, and we know that he will look after us. But this verse is so often misinterpreted. So often it's seen as saying, don't worry at all. If you're trusting in God, don't worry, he'll take care of it. But that's not what this verse is saying. And actually, you'd be hard-pressed to find a therapist who agreed with that approach either. Sufficient for the day is its own troubles. Each day has its own worries, and that's okay. Allow yourself time for these worries. Dedicate a period of time as worry time. Think about those worries, but contain them to that time. Don't let them consume you or consume your day. It's also good to remember that there are different types of worries. There's the ones that you can do something about, called practical worries, and the ones that you have no control over, called hypothetical worries. It's the practical worries that are good to think and pray over with God in your dedicated worry time. And it's the hypothetical ones that we are to give completely over to God and try not to dwell on them because, as the name suggests, there really isn't much you can do about them. But once we get past these feelings of excitement, of worry, confusion, or hope, we can start to plan for what comes next. And this can be quite exciting. It's almost as though we're getting a bit of a clean sheet. Now, a clean sheet isn't just a new concept for us to get our heads around. We actually see it happening throughout the Bible, and there's lots we can learn and put into practice from the biblical examples, even if some of the time it's an example of what not to do. Leviticus 25 talks about the year of rest for the land that was to happen every 7 years. And then it talks about the year of Jubilee that was to occur every 50 years. These years were sort of like reset buttons. It was a time to stop and rest, and the Jubilee year was to be kept holy. The year of Jubilee was a time to go back to your family group, to rest, and to rely on God's blessings. Now, does any of that sound familiar? We've been in and out of lockdown and living with some kind of restrictions for over a year now. A year in which many of us have spent a lot of time with our families. We've been resting in a way from our normal lives, and for many of us, we've been learning more and more to rely on God rather than ourselves. And now I know that this last year has been far from easy on anyone, but it has forced us to change the way that we look at life the way we interact with people, and for many of us, it's changed our relationships with God. And this isn't the only example that we see in the Bible that can be applicable to what we're facing now as we come out of lockdown. In the Old Testament, there's a period of time that is known as the exile. The Babylonians came and they took many of the Israelites into exile for around 70 years. After this period of exile, we read that the Israelites start to make their journey back to Jerusalem, stories that are told through the books of Nehemiah, Ezra, Haggai, and others. And I think that there are many things we can learn and implement to our own lives from the story of the Israelites in exile, particularly as we come out of lockdown. If we look at the book of Haggai, we see that the Jews have begun returning from captivity. The Jews quickly became caught up in trying to get their lives back to what they thought was normality. They spent a long time focusing on rebuilding their lives in the way that they wanted them, particularly to be after this period of exile. But we see Haggai the prophet bring the following message to the Jewish people. They say in chapter 1, verse 4, "Is it right for you to be living in fancy houses while the temple is still in ruins?" Haggai continues in verse 5 and 6. "Think about what you have done. You have planted much, but you harvest little. You eat, but you do not become full. You drink, but you are still thirsty. You put on clothes, but you are not warm enough. You earn money, but then you lose it, all as if you had put it into a purse full of holes." The Jews had been so focused on getting their earthly lives back to what they called normal that they were ignoring God. They hadn't even considered to rebuild his temple. They were slipping straight back into the bad habits that they had been in before, and they were not learning from their time in exile. I think that there's a really important message here for us to take out of this passage as we head out of lockdown. Of course, we can look forward to the freedoms that the end of lockdown means, but let's not put so much focus on these that we neglect our spiritual lives or neglect our relationship with God. We may not have a temple to build, as we know that God no longer dwells in a building, but if the Spirit is dwelling in your heart, how are you preparing your heart for the end of lockdown? There's still time before we reach the end of lockdown, so let's use this time to build solid foundations in our relationship with God. Let's not rush to get everything back to the way it always was. Let's use this clean sheet and look at what we used to do as a church and how we can change for the better. We're being given a fresh start. Let's not waste it by slipping straight back into our old habits.